So many cards, so many decks, so little time. Hello everyone, welcome to Friday Night Countdown here at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored from the fabulous Spanish city of Barcelona. I'm your host Rich Hagon, together with the Pro Tour historian, Mr. Brian David-Marshall.
Rich, the new set of Avacyn Restored went on sale just 7 days before round one of this Pro Tour. And we got our first look at how to draft these cards and just what impact they're going to have on constructed formats.
We'll take a look at the winning deck list of Alexander Hayne. His list featured 16 miracles from Avacyn Restored.
We'll also take a look at some of the other block decks that were successful here, decks which point to the future of the standard format.
We'll check out the high performers in the Fantasy Pro Tour. Let's see which picks made the grade.
Speaking of picks, Rich, we're going to talk to you about what cards you want to open in an Avacyn Restored draft this Friday night.
Our milestone moment this time around comes courtesy of one of the best players in the history of the game, Jon Finkel. And we'll also bring you the complete roster from the showdown that is the Players' Championship.
The winner of that tournament, an amazing tournament it's going to be, will be crowned the Player of the Year this August in Seattle. And Alexander Hayne is going to be one of those players competing for that title.
Let's take a look at his winning deck.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Tournament Center. I'm Brian David-Marshall here at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, right in the middle of day two. I'm here with Canadian Magic player, ManaDeprived.com, Alexander Hayne, and we're going to talk about a blue-white control deck and block constructed that you're playing. We'll talk a little bit about how the deck originated when we're done, but first let's take a look at the deck. Everyone loves a blue-white control deck, so let's see what's going on with the deck that you're playing this weekend. Starting up, we see Thought Scour and Think Twice. Card drawing is always a staple in a control deck, so yeah. Tell us about these cards.
Well, these are both the best instant speed card draw spells in the format. Thought Scour sometimes even draws you an extra card because being able to mill cards is very valuable.
Right, they work together, right? Sometimes
right.
You Thought Scour or Think Twice.
Exactly.
And you're playing 4 of each of these
yes.
in your deck. Okay, all right. So that seems pretty straightforward. Seems like a pretty basic thing. Let's move on to the next slide. Take a look. All right. Well, here's a couple cards. Tamayo the Moonsage obviously is an awesome card, and combined with Thought Scour is kind of like a fireball when you get to ultimate her, right?
Right. It's actually a win condition. You can use the Thought Scour on yourself to draw 3, and then when you're set up, you can use it on your opponent to deck them out.
So in case you're not understanding what's happening, if you get to ultimate this, right over here, -8, you get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size, and whenever a card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you may return it to your hand. So you Thought Scour yourself, and the 2 cards that you would mill, you go to your hand. The Thought Scour itself comes to your hand. That's 3 cards.
Yeah, plus the card you
draw.
Plus
the card you draw. It's insane.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Tamayo has one of those. The plus ability on Tamayo really.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for you to get to the ultimate. Have you actually executed that this weekend? Have you?
I have not. I once have used Tamayo Ultimate, but not with Thought Scour. I used it with Feeling of Dread actually to just tap down all my opponent's creatures. Yeah.
Now, Feeling of Dread is a card that I don't think I was expecting to see.
No, nobody
in the
was.
constructed portion. Why Feeling of Dread?
Well, it's what the deck needs. It buys you time. Like this whole deck is all about buying yourself time, and it also works well with the Thought Scours because you can mill yourself.
Sure, so this is another card that when you Thought Scour yourself, if this ends up in your graveyard, it's like an extra card.
Right. And blue and white don't really have many cheap early ways to interact with your opponent. So it's a way to stop like the fast starts like Champion of the Parish and to gather the townsfolk or something.
Right, and this is no silver bullet card. You're playing 4.
Yeah, 4 copies.
4 copies of Feeling of Dread. 4 copies of Tamayo the Moonsage. Dissipate, which is a card we would expect to see in a blue-white control deck.
1.
You're playing 1.
Well, there's a story behind that, but really this deck would not work without Feeling of Dread. That was the key card that I just came up with late at night, and I was looking through the spoiler and Feeling of Dread, and it was exactly what this deck needed. The reason there's 1 Dissipate is just so when you get the Tamayo emblem, you can counter all of your opponent's spells once you draw your deck, so you set up.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Let's move on to the next slide. And see, all right, so this is, again, Pretty basic.
Pretty basic.
4 Evolving Wilds.
4 Evolving Wilds and all basics, yeah.
All basics. You have no non-basic lands.
No, there's no allied colored lands in the format.
No
so
Cavernous Souls. No nothing.
No, nothing. Just 13 islands, 10 plains, 4 Evolving Wilds.
So that's 27 lands.
27 lands.
That's the kind of mana base you like to see.
You always want to have lands.
You want to play a land every single turn of the game, right?
Yes.
Okay, so all right, so we've seen a little bit of the control elements. We've seen a little bit of the card drawing elements. We've seen the lands. What are you doing with all this? Let's take a look at the next slide.
Time for the fun part.
This is what makes the deck special. Oh, I mean, this seems like Terminus seems like a card you would expect in a blue-white control deck.
6 mana Wrath of Gods have typically been block playable.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is even kind of better
Yes.
than a Wrath of God. We've seen people playing Angel of Glory's Rise this weekend, which gets all their humans back. So if you kill their humans, then they play the Angel.
And there's Morbid, and there's Unburial Rites, and Undying. It really interacts well against all the mechanics in the block.
Awesome. Okay, so we got a Terminus. Four copies.
Yes.
All right.
4 copies.
All right. Let's look at the next slide. Right. You understand this is block constructed, right?
Yes.
You understand this is not a legacy GP or anything like that.
Well, I wasn't quite sure, but
What? How are you playing Temporal Mastery?
that card it's very good, and it's really one of the hardest cards in the deck to play properly. But
How hard could it be to play? I take an extra turn.
well, it's all about when you take your extra turn. Sometimes when you draw it off the Miracle, you don't even want to cast it.
That's fascinating. So give me an example. You know, I draw my card. I do my little operations to make sure I keep the cards separate, and it's a Temporal Mastery. When am I not going to reveal that Temporal Mastery?
Usually in about the mid game is generally when you're not going to reveal it. When
So
you're
what,
getting
turn 3, turn 4?
then turn 3, turn 4, you usually will cast it because it'll, for instance, let you, if you have a Terminus in your hand, it'll let you get that extra land drop to be able to play the Terminus.
So you might cantrip it, essentially, right? You say, oh, I'll take an extra turn. Explore, exactly, exactly.
But it's better than Explore because there's other parts of the turn, like you can use Tamiyo again, and you get another attack phase as well.
Okay, which I saw. In fact, I saw you playing a match where your opponent had a Tamiyo.
Yes.
You had some token creatures in play. We'll get to those in a moment. And one of your tokens was locked down by the Tamiyo.
Right.
You untapped, paid 7.
Yeah.
Just 7 mana. I'm going to take an extra turn.
Right.
Attacked with 1 token, untapped, and then attacked with both tokens, killed the Tamiyo, played your own Tamiyo.
Yeah.
That was a really exciting turn. And then how did that game end, actually?
Well, it ended with me attacking him for lethal, but first I miracled one at the end of his turn with Thought Scour and took another turn.
So one of the tricky things with this deck is being able to play these cantrip spells that let you draw a card, the Think Twice, Flashing Back, Think Twice, or Thought Scour.
Right.
If you do it on your opponent's turn and the card you draw,
It's a miracle, and you can miracle it right then. And
so now we've seen 8 miracles in your deck. How many miracles could you possibly cram into a deck? All right, let's see the next slide. So we mentioned the tokens you were using to kill people. Entreat the Angels. Again, these are all 4x4?
Four copies. Everything except for Dissipate in the lands is a 4 of.
Okay, so tell me about this card.
This card is absurd. It just, even when you hard cast it, it was Noah Long, another Canadian, who first sent us a list that was playing Entreat the Angels because we weren't sure how good the Miracle cards were. It was just before the pre-release.
Okay.
And we thought, wow, this is really, he explained it, even for 7 mana, it's like a Broodmate Dragon, sort of. You make 2 4/4s.
So it's, right, 7
if you're
mana.
hard casting it.
Sure.
But when you miracle it, it's absolutely insane. I mean, sometimes, on turn 4 or turn 5, you draw for your turn, and just 2 angels, and you have, oops, I win moments.
Right. Okay.
Like one match, I miracled a Temporal Mastery, played my 9th land, played another Temporal Mastery, and then drew Entreat the Angels, miracled it for a ton, and then took my extra turn and killed my opponent.
That is awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so that's got to be the absolute limit as far as how many miracles we could put into this deck, right?
No, it's not.
All right, give me the next slide. All right. I definitely saw Terminus as a playable card in this format.
Yes.
I definitely saw Temporal Mastery as possibly a playable card, although I was pretty skeptical about it. Entreat the Angels, Decree of Justice has been a fine card in the past. Devastation Tide? How does this card work for you? And you have 4 of them.
Right, 4 of them.
I am flabbergasted.
Well, the format has a lot of token creatures, so it actually just kills the token creatures, and it bounces all the planeswalkers. It's another sort of, like Terminus, it's sort of a wrath that you can hit off of your cantrips at the end of your opponent's turn.
Okay.
And it gives you basically redundancy for the Terminuses in a way, but in some matchups it's a lot better, just being able to bounce planeswalkers and so on. And you can often set up turns where you Tamiyo one of their permanents, then like Devastation Tide, then lock down another land with Tamiyo after replaying it, or you draw cards with Tamiyo and then reset it again. There's a lot of tricks you can do, and after sideboard there's Snapcaster Mages, which you can give it flashback, cast it, return the Snapcaster Mage as well as everything else. And
oh wow,
yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
It's very good. It's probably the card that you'd think would be the worst maybe in the deck, but it's one of the better ones.
So 16 miracles.
16.
The deck is actually called Hallelujah.
Yeah, Hallelujah.
It's a miracle. So how do you, how do you just control you have no deck manipulation in terms of knowing what's on top of your deck.
Exactly, you have none.
So how do you make this deck work?
Well, it's all about the numbers. The fact that you have 16 miracle cards means that you basically have 26.66% chance of each draw to hit a miracle. And so when you're drawing on your turn and then on your opponent's turn usually, you have very high chances of hitting one of those.
Okay.
And you have cards like Feeling of Dread to buy yourself time so that you can get to the late game where you can hard cast all these spells, which are extremely powerful.
And again, the cards, I guess, start to feed into each other.
Right.
Because you can just pay 5 mana, return all the permanents to reset the game back to a neutral state, just lands, and then you get another turn to draw a card.
Right.
Or you can Temporal Mastery and you get another
turn to draw a card. Yeah. And they also buy you time, and basically whenever you miracle them, it's kind of like you just drew a Black Lotus for your turn.
So we alluded at the beginning of this segment to the origins of this deck. You worked on this deck with, you said that someone sent you.
Noah Long sent
you the list. And then you worked on this with David Kaplan?
Yeah, David Kaplan.
And where did you guys work on this deck?
Well, we're both qualified for this through level 3 Pro Invite, and we definitely wanted to go. And we were looking at flight prices, and he found that it was actually almost cheaper to take a cruise, a 14-day cruise across the Atlantic to Barcelona.
Certainly not factoring in opportunity cost.
No, but I mean, free food and excellent lodging, and we were hoping to get other Canadians on board so we'd all have a big group there and we just test on the ship. But other people only qualified later, and the price went up, so it didn't happen. It was just the 2 of us.
So you took a 14-day transatlantic cruise/brew session.
Oh yes, and we wouldn't just brew block. We also would play cube, and we played some vintage and stuff too. All sorts of different games, and
that is fantastic. Now,
it's so much fun.
Alexander, you've worked with David Kaplan before.
Yes.
The mono red deck that he played at Worlds was a deck that you originated.
Yeah, that I gave him that deck. I was too scared to play it myself, though. I played Illusions, and I definitely regret that.
Interesting. So you got off to a little bit of a rough start this tournament.
Yeah.
How difficult is this deck to play, and how much is that factored into your early results?
It's really, really difficult. I would not suggest just picking up this deck just to play in a big, important tournament because it's really hard, despite what you might think, oh, miracle. You do get some free wins, but there's the middle ground ones you have to really work for, and you have to figure out what cards you can potentially draw. Do you want to draw a card on your turn or your opponent's turn? And
explain to me, you described a situation where you lost a game because of a decision you made early on. Tell me about that decision, because it really shows you the tightrope, the tight wire act that this deck can be when you're playing it.
Well, for instance, my opponent had about 5 creatures in play, one of which was Avacyn's Pilgrim, and the other ones were 2 power. And he played another Avacyn's Pilgrim, and I should have dissipated it, because then I could have drawn.
But who dissipates the Avacyn's Pilgrim?
Exactly,
right?
Especially when it's the 6th creature on the board. But it would have allowed me to entreat, to draw entreat, and be able to entreat for enough angels to block everything except for his other Pilgrim and go to 1 life on it because I was at 2.
So I think what's important to note there is not that you know you're going to draw entreat, but you have to know that you could draw entreat, and that was one of your answers. And you could also draw Devastation Tide. You could also draw Terminus, but you have to be thinking about that card as well.
Yeah. You have to think about every potential draw you can have, and you have to figure out when to draw cards to hit that card, and it's very hard.
Right. And the temptation to think twice on your own turn is something you have to resist sometimes.
Oh yeah, you usually don't want to play cantrips on your turn, unless there's werewolves that you want to stop from flipping. You want to save them for your opponent's turn, and you want to save them when you have enough mana to cast certain miracle cards.
Okay.
Like you usually cast them when you have 2 mana open, because that everything other than Entreat you can potentially cast.
Okay. So after getting off to a 1-3 start, you've rattled off 8 straight wins.
8 straight wins.
You're 9-3. Yeah. You've got a couple big matches left to play today. Yes. You're looking for, basically looking to win the Canadian National Championship.
Right.
So if you do well enough here, and what kind of finish do you need in order to lock up gold for next year? Because we definitely want to see a lot more of you on the Pro Tour.
I need a top 75 to get gold.
Okay.
And if I get top 25, then I'm the Canadian champion.
Awesome. Okay, so Boat Brew 2.0, the Miracle, the SS Miracle.
Hallelujah.
With Alexander Hayne, this is Brian David-Marshall signing off from the Tournament Center.
That's Alexander Hayne, but there were a lot of really cool decks at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored.
Absolutely, and let's take a look at some of our favorites. Ulvenwald Tracker saw some play this weekend in green, white, and Naya decks, but Justin Plocker took it to the next level, using 4 copies of it alongside Predator Ooze in a deck fittingly called Fight Club. He went 8-1-1 with his mono green list that may be one of the sleeper decks from this tournament.
Naya was the most popular deck this weekend. From the Star City Games blue team, Josh Cho went 8-1-1 with a deck that featured Breakout Fatty Wolfear Silverheart with mana acceleration. He controlled the board with the miraculous Bonfire of the Damned, backed up by prolific Planeswalker Garruk Relentless and Restoration Angel.
Japan's Ken Yukihiro showcased a Reanimator strategy in the top 8. We talked early on day 1 with Pat Cox about his deck that used Unburial Rites to get the mighty Gristlebrand onto the battlefield. He also turned to the Angels for support with both Gisela Blade of Gold Knight and Angel of Glory's Rise. Throw in Huntmaster of the Fells, and you can see why this deck used all 5 basic lands.
When it comes to Boros decks, Paul Rietzel has a record second to none. It was Plains and Mountains in both formats for the Pro Tour Amsterdam champion, but it was Cavern of Souls that made his constructed deck tick. The Cavern could be set to either Vampire or Human on turn 1, with Champion of the Parish or Stromkirk Noble forming a lethal 1-2 punch with Silverblade Paladin.
Quietly, Sam Black has become one of the most successful deck designers in the world, from Mono Black Infect in Nagoya, through Spirit Delvers at Pro Tour Dark Ascension, as well as his own top 4 appearance at Pro Tour Philadelphia with Blue Poison in the modern format. He has consistently found the right tool for the job. He pulled Blue-Green Spirits out of the toolbox for this event, which resulted in a top 8 appearance for Jon Finkel and 2nd place for Godenis Vidugiris.
So that's 5 of our favourite decks. But which cards perform the best and would help you win the Fantasy Pro Tour? Let's check out the winners. We start with the Planeswalker category, and there were only 5 to choose from, so no major surprises that Garruk Relentless walked away with this one.
Yeah, we were joking, Rich, that the unofficial mascot of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored was Avacyn's Pilgrim. It seemed like every single player started with one of those in play on turn 1, and to nobody's surprise, it ran away with the small creature category.
In the medium category, last time around at Pro Tour Dark Ascension, Huntmaster of the Fells was a big story right the way through to the finals. Well, that turned out to be the winner here.
The big story at this event was Wolfear Silverheart. Of course, everybody was hoping it wasn't. Everyone kept being like, oh, I don't think anyone else has discovered the Silverheart. Everybody discovered it. Everybody was playing it. It was the breakout card of this event.
A little surprisingly, given that it couldn't really kill Wolfear Silverheart, at least without Morbid, the winner of the instant category was Brimstone Volley.
Yeah, and in the sorcery category, Bonfire of the Damned served as like a killing stroke, clearing the way for that final strike for the Naya decks.
You could argue that enchantments were perhaps the weakest category of all. Maybe some people went for Spectral Flight. It turned out that Triumph of Ferocity was the winner. I guess people like to draw cards.
Yeah, and they don't like their opponents to play cards from their graveyard. Grafdigger's Cage was the runaway artifact winner. Almost everybody had 3 copies of that in their sideboard.
Regardless of what colours they were playing, when it came to non-basic land, almost everyone seemed to find a use for evolving wilds.
And of course, the ultimate tiebreaker would be if you had Alexander Hayne as your pro player in the tiebreaker category.
So, that's the Fantasy Pro Tour. If you weren't playing this time, make sure you do when we get to Pro Tour Return to Ravnica in Seattle. Here on Friday Night Countdown, it's time to draft, and that means cracking open the Avacyn Restored packs, something you'll be doing this Friday night. So let's see what we get in our opening pack, and yep, I'm kind of thinking Thatcher Revolt. BDM, it looks pretty ordinary at first glance, but this card does an awful lot.
Sure, it does. 3 1/1 humans with haste. Seems almost like you're just lava spiking your opponent when you play it, but it has a ton of synergy in the Avacyn Restored draft format. If you play it with a crew and striker on the board, suddenly you have a 5-power trampler that's attacking. If you play it with a riot ringleader, everybody gets +1. If you play it with a Hagon vampire,
oof.
See, what's interesting about it is you sacrifice these tokens at the end of the turn. So a Hagon vampire gets a +1/+1 counter every time a creature dies. It gets 3 counters at the end of it. Even if you go outside of red, something like Bloodflow Connoisseur, you can play them, attack, get some value, and then sacrifice all 3 of those tokens to your Bloodflow Connoisseur, make that a 4/4 creature for the rest of the game. It's a fantastic card.
Now, of course, there are lots of good red aggressive cards, but you can pair that with some other cards, colours. So, for example, we might want to do Kessig Malcontents with a Cloud Shift. That works well together because you get to bounce the Malcontents, it comes back into play, and there's a ton of damage getting through.
Cloud Shift's great. Red-white aggro is a fantastic combination. And we did a draft tech with Paul Rietzel this weekend at the Pro Tour, and you can watch that for some really great insight on how to draft that archetype.
All right, that's one pack with Thatcher Revolt, but there are plenty of other directions to go in, so BDM, crack out pack number 2. And what do we have? Not sure that takes us very far. Wait.
Oh, okay.
All right, what are you going with?
I'm going to go with a Wandering Wolf.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite cards in the format. The first deck I ever 3-0'd in this format with was a multiple Wandering Wolf deck with a lot of Soulbond creatures.
Okay, because Wandering Wolf doesn't have Soulbond, but the card at 3 that absolutely does, it's like the pillar of the Soulbond deck, Trusted Force Mage, a vanilla 2/2 for 3. But because it has Soulbond, once you start pairing up, things get crazier. Let's just work our way through some of the Soulbond combinations. So if you've gone Wandering Wolf into Trusted Force Mage, what do you got now?
Well, I've got a 3/2 creature that can only be blocked by creatures with more power than it.
Right, okay. So that's pretty awesome.
Sure, and then there's also Druid's Familiar, which is a common Soulbond creature, gives the creature that it's paired with +2/+2.
So Trusted Force Mage with Druid's Familiar together, that's a pair of 5/5s. We've stayed in green so far. If we start with Druid's Familiar, take us somewhere else in the color wheel.
Well, sure. I mean, with Druid's Familiar, we could pair that with something like, I don't know, a Nearheath Pilgrim.
So that's 1 and a white, okay. So at that point, we've got a 4/4 Druid's Familiar with lifelink and a 4/3 Nearheath Pilgrim with lifelink. Start with the Pilgrim in white. We could go back to red, couldn't we? What would we do?
So we pair the Nearheath Pilgrim with the likes of Hanweir Lancer, and suddenly we have 4 power, a first strike, lifelink. You can also pair it with something like Lightning Mauler, and then you're able to get in there really quickly.
What if I want to go red-blue? If I've got my Hanweir Lancer in play, sure, it's a 2/2 and it could get first strike, but they've made a 3/3, let's say, so what do I do to get around that?
Red-blue is one of my favorite archetypes in this format, and that archetype revolves around Wingcrafter. And again, it's a creature that looks pretty innocuous. It's a 1/1 creature for just a single blue mana, but it gives the creature it's paired with flying. So you can make a turn 1 Wingcrafter, you make a turn 2 Lightning Mauler, and boom, you're flying over for 3 damage on turn 2. You know, both creatures get flying, both creatures get haste. It's a lot for a deck to deal with in this format.
It certainly is. Let's see if we can find something else for decks to deal with in pack 3. Out we go. And straight away we get one of my favorite cards in the set, and that's the black card Bloodflow Connoisseur. This is a deck, I don't think we've seen that many decks in draft history that really beg you to be mono black.
Well, think about what we've just talked about. We talked about all these synergies. We talked about the synergies between green and blue, the synergies between blue and red, the synergies, you know, what color didn't we mention? We didn't mention black. All those other colors have soul bond in them. Black has this kind of like counter mechanic to it, which is loner.
Yep.
And it really rewards you for having only 1 creature on the board. And Bloodflow Connoisseur is an essential tool to making sure you have only 1 creature on the board. You get to sacrifice your creatures to the Bloodflow Connoisseur, make it bigger. Maybe you have a Homicidal Seclusion on the board. Maybe you were really lucky and you opened up a Demonic Uprising.
Oh wow, because if you get 1 at the end of turn, you're going to have another 5/5 demon come to the party.
Right, absolutely.
And again, black is really good at making things die. Barter in Blood, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. You've got Bone Splinters.
And a great combination with Bone Splinters, by the way, is Undead Executioner.
Oh, so good.
Mark Rosewater crushed me with that last night in a draft. He sacrificed his Undead Executioner to the Bone Splinters to kill my guy. Then the Undead Executioner trigger went on the stack, and one of my other creatures got -2/-2. It died as well, cleared the way, got in with everybody else, and he won the draft. I was very upset.
Yeah. Butcher Ghoul, that's another great one for mono black because it's undying, you can sacrifice it, it comes back. It's a really interesting deck to build. So if you open up a pack, don't be scared of black because it was very underdrafted, wasn't it, this weekend?
It is very underdrafted. Again, you know, if you open up a red card, you open up a blue card, it's probably not going to steer you towards black. It's going to steer you towards the synergies in the other colors, which means you might get a late Barter in Blood. You know, you might get a late Bone Splinters. You know, Undead Executioners going around the table, and you can build a really, you know, it's a little harder than the other decks, but it's really very well worth it, especially if you're the lone black drafter at the table.
Whether you're going red-white aggro, or you're playing Trusted Force Mage and Green Soul Bond, or maybe you're the one with the loner black mechanic, or any of the other many draft archetypes to try inside Avacyn Restored, enjoy your drafting at Friday Night Magic. Now it's time here on Friday Night Countdown to take a look at the full roster for the Players' Championship. 16 of the finest players on Earth will converge on Seattle at the end of August. BDM, how does the 16 line up?
Well, we start out with the 2011 Player of the Year, Owen Turtenwald.
The 2011 World Champion comes from Japan, and he is Junior Ienaga.
And of course, at that same tournament, we had the Magic Online Champion, Reed Duke, and he'll be taking a spot at the Player Championship.
Our next group are all Pro Tour champions. Let's take you back to Pro Tour Philadelphia, that was modern, and the winner from Italy was Samuela Estrati.
And of course, Pro Tour Dark Ascension was won by none other than Hall of Famer Brian Kibler.
Of course, our most recent Pro Tour champion is the Pro Tour Avacyn Restored champion from Canada, Alexander Hayne.
And then we go to the regional players, and we have the top Pro Point player from North America, and that is Josh Utter-Layton.
Once we go to Latin America, this was pretty much a given, Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa of Brazil.
You know, he was really sweating it down in the final rounds of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, but Martin Yuza maintained his lead as the European representative at the Players' Championship.
Over in Asia Pacific, maybe not a lot of people at home will know about Su Ching Kuo of Taiwan, but he's been around a long time and he's been good for a lot of that time as well.
Speaking of good, Yuya Watanabe gets to represent Japan.
Well, then you get the top 5 at-large players, those with the best Pro Point finishes that are left. So, first of those, David Ochoa of Channel Fireball, and of course, the United States of America.
Then we get a couple of former Player of the Years, both of them from Japan. Shuhei Nakamura, a Hall of Famer, and of course, Shouta Yasuoka.
Now, you can't really have any great gathering of Magic players without the incomparable Louis Scott Vargas, Pro Tour Berlin winner, of course, from 2008. And finally, completing his 14th Pro Tour top 8 to make it in here, the Hall of Famer, Jon Finkel. And that brings us to our milestone moment, because BDM, you've been watching Jon play Magic at the highest level since the very first Pro Tour in 1996.
Honestly, I've been watching him even going back further than that. He used to play in the New York tournaments, and he would tear them up. He made his first Pro Tour top 8 in 1997 in Chicago. He's won a Pro Tour 3 times in the 90s, in the 2000s. He just continues to do it all the time. He has this is his 14th top 8. He is just running away with that category. He comes up to 486 lifetime pro points this weekend. He's chasing down Kai Buda and Raf Levy for the Pro Tour point lead of all time. He's won 3 Grand Prix. He's been a US national champion. He's won the Team World Championship twice. He's done just about everything there is to do. And now he gets another tournament title that he can pursue in the Players' Championship and the Player of the Year. He has been the Player of the Year before as well.
Of course. Jon Finkel is known throughout the Magic world. Alexander Hayne has yet to cement his Magic legacy. But moments after defeating Gaudenis Vidugiris in the Pro Tour Avacyn Restored final, he joined our Marshall Sutcliffe and Zach Hill to tell us all about it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Tournament Center. I am sitting here with Pro Tour Avacyn Restored champion Alexander Hayne. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That was a hell of a match.
It was.
How are you feeling?
Well,
are you a little bit exhausted right now? Put us in your seat. Like, Zach and I were sitting here watching your match.
Man.
Yeah.
And we had our breath held for half of it, I would say, especially that whole last game. How did it feel for you?
Well, I mean, when I'm playing, I'm just so in the zone that I kind of block out everything else. I don't like when I'm playing my best Magic. I don't think of the tournament at all. It's just there's just the game. There's just me and my opponent, and so it hasn't quite sunk in yet. But
does
it's
this
starting
help it
to
sink in a little bit?
A little bit.
You get to take that thing home. Also, your Rookie of the Year. Congratulations on that too.
Thank you.
So you just picked up kind of a double whammy here. Okay, so it hasn't quite sunk in yet for you. When is it going to sink in?
I don't know. Hopefully soon.
Hard to tell, I guess. I had a question I wanted to ask you about the match. One of the things we were talking about was how sideboarding was going to work. Basically, how your deck would look for games 2 through 5 if it got that far.
Right.
We were debating Feeling of Dread specifically. On the one hand, really, really powerful against Avacyn's Pilgrim. Can use basically just Rashad and port them until you're able to get enough lands to really get into gear. On the other hand, 8 hexproof creatures. Those can get really big, really fast. Totally dead against them. Was it a card? I mean, were you just positive it was going to remain in your deck for the latter games, or was it something that was kind of dubious for you?
Well, when I just first looked at their deck, we like in my team as well, we were boarding out 2 Feeling of Dreads.
Oh yeah.
But they tested the matchup. I got to sleep, so I've got a good team. And thanks to everybody who tested with me. You guys are awesome.
Good shout out.
But they found that actually it's one of the key cards in
really?
the matchup. That because you really needed to buy time, and most of their creatures don't have hexproof is the thing.
Right.
And Geist of St. Traft is the big important one, but you have your own Geist that you bring in, usually to Legend rule theirs. And Invisible Stalker is only really a threat with, often multiple things on it.
Sure.
So
some of which
you
can
take
dissipate.
Damage. Right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And you just really want to buy time. Like that's the whole goal of the deck. You want to buy time until you hit a large entreat, and then you just usually kill them.
What about that last entreat? So we know that you had 2 entreats in your hand.
Yeah, I had one in my hand. I played Think Twice End of Turn. I drew another entreat, untapped, and then drew a 3rd entreat.
And just jammed down like
5 angels. Yeah, because his deck has certainly after board he has no ways at all to deal with the angel. Game 1, he has Silent Departure. So if I just make 2 angels, it's really bad for me potentially. But after board he has no ways other than dissipate.
Okay, so you play chess.
Yes.
Competitively.
A bit. I've been on and off. I haven't played for competitively for that long, like recently.
Okay, so I want to know, how does this match up with what you do in chess? Like going from game 4 into game 5. What's going through your mind as you sit down to play this versus in chess? Is it similar to you? Like, do you just sit down and you're in the zone, you're going to do what you're going to do, and the lights don't matter, who you're playing against doesn't matter, it's just about the game and you focusing on it? Or are you pretty nervous? Are your hands sweating? Are you thinking, what if I screw up? Everybody's watching. What's in your head?
Well, my hands are always sweating from a bit of nervousness, but
Sure.
but it's not. I'm not really thinking about the people watching. I'm definitely zoned in. I mean, from chess, I have a lot of practice of just focusing in and concentrating.
You looked pretty calm.
Oh,
Were
yeah.
you faking it?
No, I was calm. I mean,
He was.
yeah. I basically when I came into top 8, it's sort of a free roll for me. I felt,
Sure.
I was already happy, and anything else was just bonus. And
Yeah, it
I
makes
was
a lot of
excited I got
sense.
to play against Jon Finkel in the first round.
How crazy was that?
That was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun to watch.
The moment I wanted to ask you about, we were watching Game 4 of your final match, and it looked like you really had it in the bag. I mean, you had a ton of lands in play, a ton of card drawing spells, but then you cast Tamio, whiff on the first activation, whiff the second time around. What did you think could go right in that match? What did you think could go wrong? What were you worried about the most from his deck? Once you got around to like turn 5, you're starting to cast your big spells. How did you think he could get out of that situation, and what were you trying to do about it?
Well, his hexproof creatures are always annoying because I certainly in that matchup I was boarding out Devastation Tide.
That makes sense.
Partly because it usually resets a bunch of his things, and including his enchantment that draws him cards.
Abundant growth.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And since after board, game 1, it's really a lot about me just entreating because he has no dissipates or anything.
Totally.
But post board, it's a lot more of an attrition match. I transform kind of into a more traditional control deck in a way.
Right.
Great. Canada. You're from there.
Yes.
And you're very happy to be representing Canada here, I think. Do you want to give any shout outs to your team, Team Anna Deprive?
Yes, and KYT, Captain Canada.
You've got Pascal Maynard.
Yes.
He tests with you as well. Is he here this weekend?
Yeah, he's here.
Did he help you build the deck on the cruise?
No, it was me and David Kaplan on the cruise.
Okay.
Yes. It's the 3rd time now that we've collaborated, and one of the previous times he top 8 at Pro Tour, so
Works out
Worlds,
nicely.
so.
You guys are definitely on the radar as the up-and-comers.
What made you sit down, look at all the miracles in Avacyn Restored, and say, I want to make a deck around these? Was it just the promise of raw power? Was it the idea to really try and build the best late game you could? There weren't a lot of blue decks at this tournament in general. How did you get to this point?
Well, really, I mean, first got sent a list by Noah Long, which was a Naya ramp list with playing Entreat the Angels.
Oh, cool.
And this was just like before the pre-release. And I looked at it, didn't like the list at all, but I liked Entreat the Angels. We thought, that's really pretty good because he explained it's sort of like Broodmate Dragon, but for 1 more mana if you have in your hand. But if you Miracle it, it's insane.
Totally.
So I thought that's good, but the problem with Miracle is that there's a lot of variance involved.
Of course.
So how do you combat the variance? Well, I thought you jammed as many Miracle cards as you can. So then if every turn you're drawing a spell, like you either have lands or miracles, you're going to hit miracles constantly.
Of course.
So the first version of the deck was playing red for Bonfire of the Damned and Thunderous Wrath, along with all the ones there
nice.
are now.
Wow.
And the mana was a bit iffy.
Seems
Bonfire
like it.
was insane, so we switched to blue-white and just kept the other ones in because they were all very powerful, and just went from there. The deck struggled with some early aggro draws, but then late at night I was on the ship on the balcony, just looking out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean
Like
on my
Titanic.
laptop, looking at the spoiler and listening to music, and I heard the song Hallelujah by John Cale come up.
Yeah.
And then looking through the spoiler, I saw Feeling of Dread, and I was like,
And it
that's
just
the
hit
deck.
you?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Wow, that is awesome.
So-
And that card did a lot of work for you in the finals there.
Oh, it's done a lot of work all the time. It's kind of like Time Walk with flashback.
It's one of my favorite limited cards.
Yeah, oh, it's
And
amazing.
I was really happy to see it get played.
Yeah, one of my friends back home, P. Sams, he thanked me for playing Feeling of Dread in a constructed deck.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were saying. It's like you just mentioned Miracle, high variance mechanic. Obviously, you want to get lucky and cast your Entreat the Angels for 6 on, when you have 8 lands in play. But you also don't just accidentally jam 4 Feeling of Dread in a constructed deck. So it sounds like you knew exactly what you're doing when you built this.
I mean, the whole point of the deck is to buy as many draw steps as you can, either on your opponent's turn or your turn. So you just keep buying time until eventually your opponent has no time because you just take all the turns. And sometimes you just entreat with a Time Walk in the stack and they just die.
Now, obviously you just won a Pro Tour, so I'm sure you wouldn't, completely redo it, but is there anything you would change about your deck in hindsight?
I would change the sideboard.
Oh, yeah?
There's much more Naya than we were expecting.
Right.
So we were expecting more red-white type, and even mono-red,
Right.
which seemed to be not a player at all.
It's the Angel's Mercy.
Well, the Angel's Mercy's not bad against the mid-range decks that
Oh,
are
yeah?
trying to,
Because again, just
play
buying
with
time.
Devil's Play and stuff, and you can flash it back with a Snapcaster.
Oh, cool.
Like the Snapcaster's in the sideboard because there's not enough spells in the main deck to flash back, but
Right.
in every matchup you board them in because you board in the spells that you want for
Oh,
that
that makes
matchup.
sense.
So it's kind of like extra copies. And the Cathedral Sanctifiers, those are the ones I would consider not playing for. They were
Sure.
never good.
Those didn't buy you enough draw steps?
No, they're not really. They were supposed to be kind of Feeling of Dread 5 through 8, but it didn't work out.
Well,
Do you have anything else for Alexander here, Zach?
No, man. I mean, as
love your questions.
phrases I thought I was not going to hear when I showed up to this tournament were, well, what the card was supposed to do was be Feeling of Dread number 5 through 8. That was how I was going to win a constructed Pro Tour. But I mean, that just goes to show, you innovate and it pays off. I mean, really amazing deck, man, and congratulations on both winning this Pro Tour and Rookie of the Year. It sounds like you earned it.
Congratulations, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What a city. What a weekend. Magic. What a game.
Yeah, and we get to do it all again at the inaugural World Magic Cup, August 17th through 19th at Gen Con in Indianapolis. Hope to see all of you there showing support for your national teams.
But until then, for the Pro Tour historian, Mr. Brian David-Marshall, on Friday Night Countdown, I'm your host, Richard Hagon, saying bye.